Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. So, good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. I know we're about to get started here in the next couple minutes, just to just to let everyone get in on time. I know we're right here at 10 o'clock Eastern time. But I figure while we are waiting and giving everybody a little bit of time to get in, I did want to give a couple of introductions and some information for anyone who's interested. So today's webinar is going to be building Oqtane modules with Syncfusion components for Blazor. And the goal of this session is we're going to explain how you can utilize these tools, build powerful and scalable business solutions for your organization or clients. Oh, I also see some people in the chat. I see a couple people from Germany and Croatia. It's nice to see you all. Uh, for introductions, I know I see everyone in here, like kind of like with their name, where they're from. My name is Carter Harris. I'm the video marketing specialist here at Syncfusion. And on brand, I am from North Carolina in the US. So I will be serving as the moderator. I'll be checking the chat. I'll be making sure everything is going smoothly. If anyone has any questions, I'll also be checking and moderating on that. For our presenter, we do have Shaun Walker, founder of DevEssence and Oqtane. Shaun, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Carter. This is going to be great. I'm excited to showcase a couple of interesting tools.
Yeah, no, I'm very excited. And I know for everyone, I'm sure you're excited too. And while you're excited, if you have any questions during this presentation, I see that you are all getting acquainted with the chat. So if you have any questions, you can enter them into that chat there, and I will go through and mark all of those as questions to kind of keep everything on track. So we'll be answering all these questions probably at the end of the session, but we'll also make sure to post any Q&A in our blog here in the next couple of days. And for anyone who is wondering, we are recording this webinar today, and we will share the link in the next few days so that all registrants will receive an email with this link. But if you want to get it a little bit ahead of time, it will also be posted on the Syncfusion YouTube channel later today. You'll be able to find this and all previous webinars available on that YouTube channel. But I think that looks like some people are joining in now. So I guess, Shaun, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you to start into the presentation.
Okay, cool. I can get started. I see a lot of people who are here from various countries, a lot in Europe. Like, this is great. So very excited to present. So I'm going to show my screen now. And yeah, today we're going to be talking about building Oqtane modules with Syncfusion components for Blazor. So I'm Shaun Walker, and as Carter mentioned, I'm the founder of DevEssence, which is a boutique consulting company that specializes mostly in Microsoft-based technologies. I'm a Microsoft MVP. I've been an MVP for 16 years with a little bit of a hiatus between different terms, but yeah, I'm an active MVP right now. I was the original creator of a popular open source project called .NET Nuke. That was way back in 2003 when I first released that product. I had a great journey with it. We raised venture capital, created a company around it. Spent a good 10 years focused on .NET Nuke, which was also referred to as DNN. More recently, I created a new open source project called Oqtane, which I'm going to be talking about today. Oqtane is similar to DNN in that it can be used as a modular application framework or a content management system. And you'll see a little bit of that when I do the demonstration. I also volunteer as the chair of the .NET Foundation Project Committee. I've actually been a volunteer with the .NET Foundation since 2014 when it was first founded, and I've been doing various things with the foundation ever since. And as my role on the project committee, we evaluate open source projects that are part of the .NET ecosystem. For those projects that want to become part of the .NET Foundation. And so we have certain criteria that we look at, and we meet every month to review projects. And we also provide support to those projects in terms of different services that the .NET Foundation offers. All right, so yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about Oqtane, and of course we're going to talk about Syncfusion. But first, I guess for the benefit of this audience, not everyone has probably heard of Oqtane or even knows what it is. So like I mentioned, it's both a content management system and an application framework. And it was built from the ground up using .NET Core. And for the UI layer, it has focused on Blazor. And then, of course, when Blazor Hybrid came out, it allowed it to work with .NET MAUI as well. And the whole idea behind Oqtane is that it helps developers build applications more quickly. So you can focus on the specific business problem you're trying to solve and not focus on building a whole bunch of infrastructure, which unfortunately is the case with a lot of software development tools these days. So Oqtane accelerates the development of modern digital experiences. So this could be web applications, it could be websites, it could also be mobile applications or desktop applications. It provides a robust set of application building blocks and services for the most common things that you need in applications, things that you probably don't want to have to build from scratch every time, and things that are not readily available within the Microsoft tooling that Microsoft provides. It's open source under a standard open source license, a permissive license, so the MIT license. And in fact, it is copyright .NET Foundation, so the .NET Foundation actually owns the code for Oqtane. And I guess since it was started, which was back in 2017, it's been pioneering the adoption of technologies such as .NET Core, Blazor, and .NET MAUI. And so with that, I think it's easy to talk about these things, but not always easy to grasp them if you're just looking at slides or listening. So I think it's easiest to maybe jump into a demo of what Oqtane looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to run the application. And we're going to see the default implementation of Oqtane come up, which is essentially a default site with a certain amount of content on it. So you can see that this site has a few default pages that are part of it. It has a search option, which is a feature that's provided as part of the framework, and it's got the ability to log in. So if I log in, and I can log in using an account that I had created previously, it will suddenly change a little bit, and I can see that there's some additional content that's displayed on the page because I'm an authenticated user. And there's some new tools that are available in this area of the screen here. So I can go into edit mode, which basically shows me the different regions of the page that have different types of content in them. On this page, there's 3 different what we call modules that are present on this page. And each of these modules have distinct set of content. I can go ahead and I can edit the content using a rich text editor. So this is sort of the limited functionality that is available for content management purposes. Each module also has a set of settings that you can see, which define sort of the title of the module, some of the different look and feel aspects of it, the permissions of who's allowed to view that module, who's allowed to edit it, and then some other display characteristics as well. So that's sort of edit mode versus non-edit mode. We also have this control panel. The control panel provides access to a bunch of functionality that is included with the Oqtane framework. So we have an administration dashboard, which exposes all of the sort of back-end functionality for managing the various aspects of the site. So you've got site settings for setting the configuration for how this site should behave. You've got page management, which basically allows you to manage all of the different pages which are part of the site. And in an Oqtane sense, pages are virtual, so you can create as many pages as you want, and you can create them at runtime. So you don't have to basically create a page using code and deploy it to a server. You can create it as a virtual page, which is essentially just configuration, and it'll automatically appear in your menu, and it'll be automatically available to your users. You've got user management. Under the covers, it's using the Microsoft .NET identity for doing user management, but it actually provides a bunch of additional functionality on top of .NET identity. For example, it has a whole rich sort of profile management area where you can define the different properties that are part of a user's profile. And then once you've defined these, it can organize them on your user profile page. So they'll be displayed, and so you can basically have users enter profile information simply by managing the user profile in the profile management area. You've got role management, where you can define the users and what roles they're assigned to. You've got a file manager, which allows you to manage files and folders and upload files to the site. recycle bin for deleted pages and deleted modules. They're not immediately deleted. They're put in the recycle bin in case you want to restore them later. URL mappings would be to remap URLs for perhaps if you're migrating from another site or another application and it had very specific URLs and you want to map them to new URLs on your new site, you can use URL mappings for that. Visitor management allows you to track the visitors. So I'm talking about the anonymous visitors that are visiting your site. So you can keep track of sort of the different levels of traffic that your site is receiving. The search capability, so it's got a whole search indexer, which can index all of the content within a site. And that's how this search box actually operates, of course. You can type in keywords and it'll find the various areas in the site where that keyword exists. All activities in the site are logged. So not just errors, but all major activities are logged. So that you have an event log where you can easily access all of the different things that are happening in your site. It's a multi-tenant solution as well, so that you can have actually multiple sites that are part of a single installation. And this is super powerful. If you're not interested in doing a lot of deployments, you can deploy one version of Oqtane and then you can spin up a bunch of different sites. And each site can have their own unique URL for accessing them. For example, if I want to go to this test site, I can browse to it, and then this is a completely different site. It looks more familiar to those people who are familiar with Blazor because it's using a theme that makes it look like the original Blazor theme. And it has a set of pages that are part of it. And then, of course, I can go back to site management and go back to my original site. So we've also got module management, so you can have a variety of different types of modules that are part of your site. Some of them are built into the framework. And of course, you can build custom modules as well, which is what we're going to be talking about in a moment. Themes are controlling the look and feel of your site. And you can define custom themes or use third-party themes to change the look and feel. You can define the languages that are part of your site as well. So which languages your site caters to as far as an administrative perspective. Because Oqtane is fully localized, meaning all of the text in the various parts of the application that is non-content is localized, meaning there's language packs available that you can transform the entire user interface into different languages. It has a scheduled jobs capability as well, with a certain number of scheduled jobs that are built in by default. For example, it's got a notification job. So it's got a notification API that's part of the framework that you can write to, and then that'll basically send emails in an asynchronous manner out to your users. So it's got a purge job for doing housekeeping of the site, and then it's got the search index job, which runs and indexes the content. And of course, you can build your own custom scheduled jobs as well for doing offline sort of asynchronous processing in the background. It's got a SQL management capability. This would only be available to the very like super user access, which is what I'm logged into right now as the host user. And it basically allows you to do queries against the backend database that are part of this Oqtane site. System info tells you a little bit about this site. So this particular version we're running is our latest version. So it's Oqtane 6.0, and this is running on .NET 9, which of course was just released yesterday, but we have a version of Oqtane that's already running on .NET 9, and it gives you some other details about the application. You can also configure things that are set in app settings if you want to log more detailed errors or such. And then you also have a log as well. And these are, of course, not really important aspects, but these are other types of logs that are not applicable to a specific site. And we also have a system update capability as well, meaning if you want to update the framework to a newer version, the system update will tell you if a new version is available, and it'll give you the option to automatically download it and install it to your environment, making the upgrade of the framework very simple. So there's a lot of functionality there. And I mean, in general, it would take a long time to kind of explore it all. But we're going to focus in the module management area today. I think the other thing I want to show you is in site settings. You've got a lot of different options here, but in particular, we've got these UI component settings. So by default, this site that we're running is using static render mode. And for interactivity of modules, it is using server, so Blazor server using SignalR. If I don't want to use SignalR, I can simply change this and say, I want to use WebAssembly for the interactivity for this particular site for all of the interactive modules. So if I change this and I save it, it's going to take a moment because it's got to download to the browser, but now my entire site is running, at least for the interactive portions, it's running on WebAssembly. And so if we go into the admin dashboard, like these particular modules, like the admin modules, are all interactive. They're using interactive Blazor. So this module is running on WebAssembly now. And if I go to this one, this module is running on WebAssembly now. So if I go back to site settings and I go down to UI component settings, I can also say that I want to run the entire site as an interactive application, meaning I'm not going to be using static server-side rendering at all for the site. I'm going to be globally interactive. And I'll run that on Blazor server using SignalR. Again, if I update this, my site will update, and now I'm actually running fully interactively. Everything's being rendered interactively using Blazor. So the one, I guess, cool thing about Oqtane is that it allows you to target all of the different render modes and hosting models that are part of Blazor in a single application, right? You don't have to choose a specific template for a specific render mode, which is what Microsoft makes you choose when you're, spinning up a new project in Visual Studio. Oqtane supports them all out of the box and gives you configuration options so that you can choose them. So I'm going to go back to static and server for now, because this is sort of the default option. It tends to be one of the best options for performance as well, because that means that pages like this with mainly static content are going to be rendered fully on the server statically, and only those specific components that need interactivity are going to use SignalR. All right, so with that, I'm going to switch back to my slides, and I'm going to explain a little bit more about Oqtane from a more technical perspective. So from an architecture perspective, Oqtane is a client-server application, so a single-page application kind of architecture. You've got the server side of it, of course, running on .NET Core and using EF Core for the data access on the back end. Oqtane has its own repository that, of course, uses EF Core. It's got its own API layer, so it's essentially got a headless API that can be used to interface with the back end of the system. It's got scheduled jobs, which I explained when I was doing the demonstration. And then each module that you develop can also have a back end API, almost like a microservice API for each module that can be deployed to the back end. And then, like I mentioned, Oqtane is multi-tenant, so you can have multiple databases as well. You can, and I'll explain this more in a moment. On the client side, you're using, Blazor Server, Blazor WebAssembly, or Blazor Hybrid for the UI. Oqtane has its own API wrappers, which provides a strongly typed set of classes for accessing data through HTTP client. It's got a composable component UI, which is what I mentioned when I said that you basically can create new pages and you can add content to pages dynamically on the fly at runtime, because all it is just configuration. You don't need to basically write code and do deployments. You can do it dynamically. And so that's what a composable component UI is about. And then, of course, you can have many different sites that are part of your installation. Each site can have many pages, and you can have many different modules that are deployed as well for the front end. And that all of that allows you to target sort of an omni-channel UI, meaning you can target web, you can target mobile, and you can target desktop. All right, so when we talk about multi-tenancy, there's a number of different configurations when it comes to multi-tenancy. The most important one is at the application layer. Right? You want to have sort of one shared instance of code that is running in the runtime environment. So that's where the framework installation comes in. So that's a shared installation that can be used to serve the needs of multiple clients at the same time. On the back end, at the database layer, you may want to have all of your data in a dedicated location, right? With completely separate data for each client. In the shared model, you're sharing the front end, or the application layer is shared, but each client has its own distinct database, physical database, where the data is stored so that it's kept physically isolated from one another. And this is important in environments where there's a lot of regulation, where data needs to be kept completely separate from one another. So Oqtane supports this model. And Oqtane also supports a shared model. This is mostly used in environments where you're trying to basically save money by not spinning up a lot of databases. So you can store the client data in a shared database location. So this is basically logically partitioned rather than physically partitioned. So Oqtane supports all of these different multi-tenant configurations, which give you a lot of flexibility in terms of how you do your deployments. It also, because it's .NET Core and it supports cross-platform deployments, it supports SQL Server. It also supports SQLite, MySQL, and Postgres. So you have a lot of different options that you can use depending on what operating system that you're using for your deployments. Of course, this is all using EF Core as the data access sort of technology. But behind the scenes, you have the ability to use different types of databases. And in fact, within a single installation, you may have multiple sites that are part of that installation, and each site can use a different database if you so desire. There's no restriction on that all the sites have to use the same type of database within an Oqtane installation. Security is always super important, so I like to show this security slide. So the Oqtane server, of course, in the middle here, I mentioned that it's using the .NET based identity for local authentication. And then it also has the ability to interface with third-party identity providers. So what I'm talking about there is OAuth 2 providers or OIDC providers. So it has that built in out of the box where you can just provide some configuration to connect to a different IDP. And then you can use, of course, that IDP for authentication. Oqtane is using a backend for front-end security model, which essentially means that it's the underlying technology that BFF uses is cookies. So it uses cookies for managing the authentication and authorization aspects of the web interface. If you do have remote clients, either downstream or upstream, Oqtane also has the ability to generate JOT tokens and consume JOT tokens so that you can use that security methodology as well. So again, you've got a lot of different options here and a lot of flexibility to support different deployments of the Oqtane framework. Oqtane's quite popular, so it's had quite a lot of adoption over time. We've had 57 different contributors to the open source project. The project has over 1,900 stars, 6,000 commits, and 2,700 pull requests. So very active. It's been very active since it was first introduced. The open source project was originally created in 2020. And since then, there's been a lot of adoption and a lot of activity as part of the open source community for Oqtane. Oqtane also has a marketplace. So the whole idea with Oqtane is you can build third-party modules and themes. If you can build those for your own internal purposes, if you so desire, or you can build them as third-party products that other people can utilize as part of their Oqtane installations. So the Oqtane Marketplace is similar it follows kind of an app store model where the creators of extensions list their products in the marketplace. And then when you're running Oqtane, you can go into the module management area and you can say that you want to install a new module, and it'll basically pull in all of the different modules that are available within the ecosystem, and you can seamlessly install them much the same way that you do on iOS or Android or any of the mobile platforms. Like I mentioned, there's been a lot of releases of Oqtane over time. The most recent release, of course, is Oqtane 6, and that's on .NET 9. We've tended to follow the .NET major release schedule, meaning we've had a major release of Oqtane every time Microsoft had a major release of .NET. And so that in that way, we've been able to keep up with all of the innovation and patching and all of the great things that Microsoft is doing as part of the modern releases of .NET. All right, so now we're going to talk a bit about Syncfusion, because this is a Syncfusion webinar. Talked a lot about Oqtane already, but what we're going to talk about is how you can utilize Syncfusion as part of an Oqtane installation. So of course, Syncfusion has a Blazor component library. It's a very rich and robust library, and it has a lot of different components that are part of it. Oqtane has a few sort of general components, UI components that are part of the framework, but the general idea is it does not want to be in the business of creating its own UI component library. It wants users and developers to be able to use their preferred UI component libraries, whether that's Syncfusion or any of the other UI component libraries that are available. So integrating a UI component library with Oqtane is a very common thing that most developers want to do. For the purpose of this demo, what I find personally is that where the third-party UI component libraries really shine is for more advanced scenarios. For example, like grids or reports or things that are very complex. And an example here would be the Syncfusion org chart component, right? It's a very complex component that I would never want to write from scratch myself. So in this particular case, this is a place where a UI component like an org chart component can provide great value to a developer because you can utilize the features that are part of that component and just provide the configuration that's necessary. I know that a lot of folks, a lot of developers, when they approach a UI component library, they think that they need to use every single component that component UI library offers, and they'll use it for even primitive things like labels and text boxes and things that are pretty simple. That's generally not the approach that I take, but there's nothing wrong with that approach either if you want to go all in, because in that case, then you get the benefit of a very consistent sort of theming model, right? Because each UI component library typically provides their own way of theming their components as well. And if you want them all to look consistent, then that's a way to accomplish that. But in my case, what I'm going to be demonstrating today is really just choosing a specific UI component that is really rich in functionality and then utilizing that as part of an Oqtane module. So in order to use the Syncfusion components, if you don't own them already, of course, Syncfusion offers a 30-day free trial license where you can go to their website and you can sign up and you can get a free license key that's good for 30 days. So you can at least try it out. So that's a great thing for developers who really just want to do some experimenting to see what a UI component library like Syncfusion is capable of. If we look at the Oqtane module architecture, an Oqtane module is architected in exactly the same way that the Oqtane framework is architected, meaning it follows a client-server architecture model. So you have a distinct client project, you have a distinct server project, and we're following the model where you actually have a shared project as well, where you can put your models so that they're available to both the client and the server. It is built using standard .NET methodology, using Blazor for your Razor components. And ultimately, once you've built your module, you can package it up as a NuGet package. And that package can then be installed into an Oqtane installation. So the easiest way to get started with Oqtane in terms of building a new module is to actually use the Oqtane framework itself. So you'll be logged in as the host user of the Oqtane framework, and you'll navigate to the admin dashboard and you'll go to module management. And in module management, there's an option to create new module. That'll give you this sort of dialogue that you can provide some very basic information about, who you are in terms of you're the owner of this particular module. You're going to create what are you called, what the name of the module is going to be. And you can choose a template. By default, it provides a default module template that you can use. And you can target a specific Oqtane framework version. In this case, it's just using the currently installed version, and it'll scaffold out a complete set of code for you in a specific folder on your, in your local environment. This will include all of the assets, including solution files, project files, Razor files, like front end, back end. The entire module will be scaffolded for you, and it'll be very simple from that point on then for you to open it up in Visual Studio, compile it, and run it. So very simple to get started with Oqtane because we've got this scaffolding capability built in. So once you've got your module actually scaffolded and you want to integrate a third-party UI component library like Syncfusion, there's a few things that you need to do. So we need to go into the client project initially, and we need to add a package reference. And I'm going to be showing all of this in Visual Studio in just a moment, but I'm just trying to itemize the simple sort of steps that you need to follow. So we need to add a package reference to syncfusion.blazor, which is the Syncfusion Blazor UI library. We need to register Syncfusion in our startup, and we need to declare the resources, meaning the static resources, static assets that are dependencies for Syncfusion Blazor library, and also declare any dependencies that are needed if we're going to run in WebAssembly. So moduleinfo.cs is a Oqtane specific class, and I'll show you that in a moment. We also have a package project that is created automatically as part of the scaffolded code. In that package project, there's a debug.cmd file. So it's a command line executable that is executed as a post-build step when you build your Oqtane module. So essentially, it's just a number of commands that are there to deploy assemblies to specific locations so that Oqtane can be aware that they exist. Because the idea in Oqtane is that you build your modules independently, completely separate. So it's modular, fully modular in that sense, right? These are not statically linked assets that are linked to the main Oqtane framework. They're built separately, independently in their own location. They're developed there, they're serviced there, and they're packaged separately as well so that they can be deployed separately. That's the whole idea in terms of when you're building composable and modular applications. And so the debug.cmd file is for deploying the assemblies to the appropriate locations. And then, of course, there's also a new spec file. So if you're going to release your specific component at some point, you would need to update the new spec file to include the assemblies in it as well. So if we look at this in sort of a more visual form, if we look at the files that were scaffolded for a particular Oqtane module, we've got a list of the folders, and of course, these folders all contain files. And then, as I mentioned, the package folder is highlighted and this debug.cmd file is there. And I'm going to show you what that looks like in a moment. But the idea is that this debug.cmd file automates the deployment of various assets to the Oqtane framework. So it copies assemblies from each of the assembly folders into the Oqtane bin folder in the same location so that all those assemblies end up in the right place. It also copies static assets to specific locations. So the syncfusion.blazor has a bunch of CSS files and JavaScript files which need to be deployed as part of the Syncfusion UI component library. So those need to be deployed from your local module area to the _content folder in the www root in the Oqtane framework. Similarly, if you have custom CSS files or custom JavaScript files that are part of your module, those have to be deployed to the Oqtane framework as well. And so the debug.cmd file takes care of all this, but this is just visualizing actually how it's moving the files around so that you understand what it's actually doing under the covers. And then, of course, you have the module server project. Again, you have to add a package reference. You have to register the Syncfusion service and add the license key. And then you have to also make sure that you've added the static web assets that Syncfusion UI component library depends on, which are the JavaScript and CSS files. And you need to put them in the specific folder location. All right, and so how to get those static assets, because this is something that a lot of people don't understand, is so Syncfusion.Blazor, if you go to NuGet.org, of course, you can find their package there. You can download that package, which is a .kg package. You can open it because it's just a simple, zip archive, essentially. And you can find the static web assets that are part of it. And so you would extract all of the static web assets and you would place them into the specific folder within your module, right? So you put them in this _content folder, Syncfusion.Blazor, and that would include all the scripts and all of the style sheets that are required. And so that's how you can basically, for a specific version of Syncfusion.Blazor, this is how you can get all of the static assets. If you want to save yourself a lot of time and effort, one of the members within the .NET, the Oqtane ecosystem, Studio Elf, who's actually Lee Pointer, has created a bunch of templates for various UI component libraries. And so he has a template for Syncfusion. And so, like I said, you can go into the module management area and you can find this module and you can download it. And that means it'll download the template files to your local installation. And then when you go to create a new module, instead of just seeing the default template there, you'll see a Syncfusion module template. And then it'll scaffold all of the necessary files for you and put all of which will include all of the Syncfusion assemblies, and it'll include the Syncfusion static assets. So it'll save you a bunch of time if you want to use this approach. So now let's talk a little bit about the org chart component, which we're going to utilize as part of the Syncfusion UI component library. So we're going to build a module in Oqtane, and it's going to be an org chart module. There is a page on the Syncfusion site which demonstrates how to use the org chart the org chart component. So it has an org chart, and it has various properties that you can set just to change the orientation and the alignment of the diagram. You can change the spacing. So that's all kind of interesting. And then it doesn't just provide a demo of it, but it provides source code as well. So you can see how it's implemented. So this is a great place for me to get started in terms of building an Oqtane module. What I'm going to do is I need to think a little bit about how I'm going to design my org chart module within Oqtane. Like, what is my UI design going to look like? It's not going to look exactly the same as this. I want to do it a slightly different way. So the main view of the module is going to show the org chart. So basically this portion, the left-hand portion of the demo that Syncfusion has on their site. I also want to make it interactive. So whereas the Syncfusion demo, of course, contains some hard-coded models for the different people that are part of the organization, I want this to be dynamic. So I want the user to be able to enter the different items that are going to be part of the org chart. So I need an edit component for that. And then I'm going to have a settings component where I'm going to allow the administrator to configure how the org chart module should look. Essentially, it will take the properties portion that's here, plus add a bunch of additional options, and it's going to put those into this settings component. And so essentially we have 3 different Razor components that are going to be part of this module, each with their own specific purpose. And you'll see in a moment how they all kind of flow together from a UI perspective. And so from a development approach, the easiest thing for me to do was utilize the scaffolded module code that I'd already created, that I've already integrated Syncfusion component library into. And now I'm going to copy the example source code from the Syncfusion site, because that page that I showed you has the ability to get access to the source code, paste that source code into my index component, test it to make sure it works. And then once it's working, I can start to refactor the code and add the new functionality that I want. And the other thing is the Syncfusion sample has stock images for all of the different people that are involved in it. It's got stock images for the orientation and the alignment. So I'm going to download those, and I'm going to use those as part of my module deployment as well. All right, so now we're going to move back into a demonstration of Oqtane and Syncfusion. So if I go into Visual Studio, so I've got my DevEssence module, org chart module that I've already created. And like I said, it's got a client project, a package project, and a server project. So first, let's go over how we integrated Syncfusion into this. So if we go into the client project initially, we can see that we added our package reference here for Syncfusion.Blazor version 27.1.58, which I guess is the latest version of Syncfusion Blazor. In the client startup, I needed to add Syncfusion Blazor as a service, and I also needed to add code to register the license. And so this would be that license key that I registered for on the Syncfusion site and was able to obtain there. The module info, which is also part of the client project, allows me to define the resources that this module depends on. And in this case, this module depends on a few a style sheet and a script, right? This is the Syncfusion Blazor JavaScript library, and this is the Bootstrap style sheet that the Syncfusion UI components rely on. I declare those as resources within my module so that when this module is rendered dynamically into my page, it knows how to inject the HTML elements for these style sheets and JavaScript libraries into my page. I also want to declare my dependencies, which are essentially my assembly names. And this is only useful if I'm going to run this application in WebAssembly or on .NET MAUI, because basically in those environments, it means it needs to download some assemblies to the client device and run them there. So in those cases, it needs to download the shared assembly that's created as part of my module. It needs to download the Syncfusion licensing assembly, and it needs to download the Syncfusion.Blazor assembly. Again, this is, if I'm running on the server, I don't need to specify dependencies, but if I'm running on the client, I do, because the client needs to know how to download or which assemblies it needs to download. All right, moving on to the package project now. We've got the debug.cmd file. And you can see it's just doing simple Xcopy of assemblies, and it's copying them to a specific location. And these locations are all defined for you, because when you scaffold a module within the Oqtane framework, it places them by convention in a certain location, basically at the same level as the Oqtane framework. And so then it knows pathwise how it can deploy things. So it's copying all of the module assemblies, and then it's also copying the Syncfusion Blazor assembly and the Syncfusion licensing assembly, because those are critical dependencies that need to be deployed as well. On the server project, we've got the package reference to Syncfusion.Blazor. And in the startup, we've defined registered the license key here and added the Syncfusion Blazor service. And so that was all of the integration steps that were required in order to get the Syncfusion UI component library to work properly in Oqtane. So now let's take a little bit, well, actually, let's run this. So if we run this application, we'll bring up our Oqtane site again. And I've created an org chart page. This page doesn't have anything on it currently. It's just a page that is visible to users of my site. If I go into my admin dashboard, or sorry, my control panel, I can add modules to the page. So I can see that the org chart module, because I compiled it and the assemblies were deployed to Oqtane, Oqtane immediately became aware of it. There were no steps involved in having to register it or anything. It just realized it was there, and now it makes it immediately available in my UI. So choose org chart, and I'm going to add this module to my page. All right, so I now have an org chart module that is part of my page, and it's telling me I need to configure the module settings in order for it to display something. So I can go into the module settings, and I can say permissions-wise, oh yeah, okay, that's fine. All users are allowed to see this module. Container settings, I don't want to display the title. I don't think that's necessary on this page. And I can go into my module settings, and here I have a whole bunch of configuration options, right? These are those configuration options which were displayed to the right-hand side of the example page on the Syncfusion site. So I can define the height of the diagram. I can specify different orientations, and it shows the image which was on the Syncfusion site. I can configure various aspects of how it's displayed. Most importantly, I have a template here, which will display individual org chart items using an HTML template that I can define and I can modify. And it uses tokens so that dynamically at runtime, it'll replace certain elements with the actual data. So if I save this now, and I go back to the org chart page, I have an org chart, it's configured, but there's no data for it to display. So if I go into edit mode, I'll see that I can add an item. So if I add an item, I can say that I'm going to add myself, Shaun Walker. I'm going to say that I'm the CEO of this organization. I am at the top, so there's no parent, root, and I've downloaded, like I said, a bunch of these images that were part of the stock images that were part of the Syncfusion component. And if I say save, I now have a node that's displayed in my org chart, and I can add as many nodes as I want, and I can click my name to go back into edit. I can delete this, it's gone now. And one of the other cool capabilities of Oqtane is it provides the ability to import as well. So I can go in and I can say I want to import content. And I have a bunch of content, again, based on the Syncfusion sample page. And I'm going to paste that in here, and I'm going to import. And I have a breakpoint in here because I was testing this earlier. And content imported successfully. And now we have a full org chart with a bunch of different data that's part of it. By default, it also has the ability through this component so that I can collapse and expand different elements of the org chart. And all of these items are editable as well. So now that the information actually has been imported, so I have a bunch of content that's been added. We're going to go into the admin dashboard, and we're going to take a look at the scheduled jobs for a moment. If we look at the scheduled jobs, we can see it last ran. It should run any moment now. It's executing now. So every minute, this scheduled job runs, and it determines if there's any new content that needs to be indexed. So if I refresh, it indexed 17 new items, which would be 17 new employees, essentially, that I added to my org chart. So if I'm here and I type in Pedro, who is one of the items, it finds that Pedro Alfonso exists on a certain page in my site, and I can click on that, and it takes me to the org chart, and there's Pedro. So rich kind of like these are the types of functionality that Oqtane provides out of the box. I'm going to also show you. So now let's go into the admin dashboard, into site settings. And I showed you these UI component settings earlier. So right now, this site is configured to use static render mode and server or SignalR interactivity, right? Blazor server. I'm going to change this to use WebAssembly, which means that this site is now going to be statically rendered, but the interactive components are going to be rendered using WebAssembly. And if I go to my org chart page, it continues to work because the way that Oqtane modules are developed is their client server, which means that they will run in every render mode in every hosting model. We didn't need to change anything. We didn't need to change any code. The code was already set up in such a way that it would work in whatever render mode and hosting model that you choose. And to demonstrate something even more, I guess, interesting about Oqtane is, so we have this web site. Oqtane also provides you with a MAUI solution as well that you can use along with it. And so I have the Oqtane MAUI solution loaded up here, and I'm going to run the Windows machine emulator. And so it's going to run basically my same Oqtane framework, but this time within a desktop container. And we can see that, we have the same kind of functionality here. I can even log in to this MAUI instance. Oops, if I type the password correctly. So I'm logged in, same kind of functionality exists in the desktop as exists in web. But interestingly, I can click on the org chart, and the org chart works in MAUI as well, because the Oqtane module was configured in such a way that it downloaded the Syncfusion UI component library to the MAUI instance that's running, and it rendered the component. And all of the data it's retrieving from the Oqtane server, from the server instance that's running. And all of these images are actually coming from the Oqtane server as well. But this is all running within the .NET MAUI shell. So some pretty powerful stuff that is possible by using Oqtane. Oops, and I didn't mean to do that. So going back to the web instance, I think that was sort of the demo, but I'll show you a little bit now of the actual code itself. So client project. Client project, like I said, has various components that are part of it. So it's got an index component. The index component, like I said, is sort of the main view of the a module, which shows the org chart. So we can see the Syncfusion diagram component here. So this is all of the different configuration that is necessary for that Syncfusion org chart component. So it sets, a bunch of different properties. It gets the data source property. And it has the template, which is the HTML template that we defined in the settings. If we scroll down, we can see on initialize, it's checking to see if the template's been set. If not, it shows that you must configure the module settings message, which we saw. It's going to load data using an org chart service to get the items for the org chart for this particular module instance. And then it puts them into a sort of a UI sort of model, and it has to do this. It has to transform them into a different model, because on the database side, the ID and the parent ID are integers, and it seems that Syncfusion's UI org chart component doesn't support integer-based IDs. It needs string IDs, so I had to convert them into a new model in order for the org chart to work. It is grabbing the settings from the settings service for orientation, alignment, and various things, and setting them accordingly. The item width, item height, spacing, all of that come from the settings. And of course, those are going to be used when the diagram, the org chart diagram, is rendered. There's certain events that the Syncfusion org chart component expose that you can hook into. And of course, we're doing that to add a functionality, like we have to define that the nodes are going to be based on HTML, and we have the ability to set whether they're expandable or not. We have a bunch of other sort of UI configuration as well. And when we display an item, this display item event is fired for every single node that is going to be rendered. And we get the data for the node, and then we can do our token replacement, right, to replace the various tokens with actual data from the model and display it. So that's all pretty straightforward. The edit component, we're not using any Syncfusion UI components in this component. We're just using very basic primitive elements like input elements, select elements, right? Except that there are a few more advanced components that are provided as part of Oqtane, like the file manager, provides that integration with the Oqtane file management capability. And so it's basically, this is your data entry form with all of your different fields. And then it loads the data from the backend data source, populates them, and then you can save them or update them as you would desire. The settings component, again, very similar, sort of very simple form. You've got the ability to set the height, the orientation, the alignment, all that stuff that was on that UI that we saw. And then Oqtane provides a settings service by default. You don't have to build that. So you can load items from the settings service, and you can save items to the settings service. And so you don't have to build your own settings service. It already exists. You just have to plug the specific data for your module into it. All right. It's scaffolded this service for me. And so it uses, of course, an HTTP client to get, JSON from the back end. So it's using a controller, like it's going to call the API controller on the back end to get data, which is then used to serve the UI. This service on the client side is only used when you're running on Blazor WebAssembly or .NET MAUI, because in that scenario, you're actually running in a true client-server architecture, right? Where you have you have a client front end and you need to call a back end. If we look in the server project, we also have an alternate implementation of the org chart service. This org chart service is used if you're running server side. So if you're running with Blazor server, or like, I guess in this particular case, we're not using static Blazor to render a module, but if you were, you don't need to use HTTP client in that case, right? You can actually get the data directly from the repository. And so, but it scaffolds out all this code for you so that it runs in all of the different render modes and hosting models. So I think that's pretty much all. I mean, you can scaffold your own Oqtane module and see all of the different code that it creates for you. I think the only maybe thing remaining I'll show you is this manager class. So it creates a manager class for you. Oqtane provides a certain number of interfaces that you can implement optionally. So for example, iPortable is what provides the capabilities for import-export. So we have simple methods like export and import, which allows you to export data from your module and then import data into your module. And you get to implement that however you want to. There's also an iSearchable interface, which you can implement if you want to, which this module implements get search contents. So it basically gets the data from the org chart and then puts it into the search content index. So that's basically how the search index works and how that functionality worked under the covers, is you get to implement it within your module. So I think with that, I've covered a lot and I'm getting near time here. But I hope that provided a good overview of the capabilities that are part of Oqtane and how you can use Syncfusion UI components as part of your Oqtane modules. All right, so I'm coming back now. I'm going to look at the questions. Question is, Syncfusion license is a global setting. How do you support multiple components with different licenses for different modules? So I'm not sure if the question means if you have different UI component libraries that you're trying to use, or you're trying to use different Syncfusion licenses as part of the same installation. I'm not sure why you would want to do that. The way that I registered it here is I registered with it within the that specific module. If you have a bunch of different modules that you've created, you don't have to actually implement that licensing code in every one of your modules. You can have it actually just registered in one of them, or you could just have one licensing class which implements the iClient startup or iServer startup and has the license registration in one place, and it will cover all of the modules that are installed within your installation that are using the Syncfusion UI component. So if you build modules for sale, okay, so if you're building modules to actually just share with other people, so like basically if you're building commercial products, and so you're not building just for internal use, then you're right, have to find a different mechanism for handling the license key. Although so in order to use the Syncfusion license in a commercial setting, you would have to have the proper type of license for that. So if you're a commercial vendor and you want to use the Syncfusion licenses, you'd have to have like a license that would allow you to do that. And then you would probably have to figure out a way to include that license in a way that it is more obfuscated than having it just like in plain text in the code like I had in this example. My example was more if you were building a module for internal use, which is more often what people are building with Oqtane. Question is, difference to .NET Aspire distributed application. So Oqtane doesn't use .NET Aspire. Oqtane is a modular monolith, I guess you could say. You probably heard that term a lot lately. There seems to be quite a large pushback in the industry against microservice-based architectures because they just are so complex and they're so overkill for the vast majority of scenarios. So Oqtane is built using a modular monolith kind of architecture, where you build a bunch of different modules. They're composable, they're deployable separately at runtime, but it's not like a true distributed microservice-based application. And there is no integration with .NET Aspire at this point. It's not on the roadmap. I know that .NET Aspire is quite powerful if you're building distributed applications, but in general, people are not building those types of applications with Oqtane. One thing I always need is the concept of multiple drafts. So I would need to have a page that is published. Then so you're talking about like if you were going to use Oqtane as a content management system, and you just want to use the functionality that's out of the box, it doesn't have the ability to do multiple drafts. You could certainly build your own HTML text module that supported multiple drafts. Oqtane, that's the whole idea. It's extensible. If it doesn't do exactly what you want it to, build your own custom module and make it do exactly what you want it to. There's no limit in terms of like what you can do in that respect. But if you just want to like get a content management system and use it out of the box just as a pure content management system, like a site builder, then you're right. Oqtane doesn't support that right now. And you probably would need to use a different CMS maybe if you're not willing to create your own custom module. The org chart page created appeared to be in the admin dashboard panel. It actually was not. The org chart page was displayed on just a regular page within the site. It was not part of the admin dashboard. So it was registered as a page that any user could see. I want to use Entra ID to do resource-based access control. So you can absolutely use Entra ID to hook it up with Oqtane. Actually, I guess I could show that quickly. So I'll show my screen again. And we'll go back to Oqtane and run it. All right. So I guess to answer the question, I'll log out. I'm no longer the administrator of the site, so I don't have access to the control panel or the admin dashboard. And I go to the org chart page, and it's loading, and it renders the org chart. So it's just a regular page on the site. All right, so if I log in, whoops, not as hosty. And I go to the admin dashboard, and I go into the user management area. I have a settings tab, so I can go into the settings tab, and this is where all my user settings for this specific site are set. So I have the ability to set a lot of different aspects of the user management area. So I can set, whether the site's using two-factor authentication or not. I can specify password complexity rules. I can set whether or not I'm using lockout. But here's where the external login settings exist. And let's say I want to use Microsoft Entra. So Microsoft Entra essentially uses OIDC under the covers. It fills in the specific information that you need. So basically you need to get from Microsoft Entra, and it's got an info button here too. So if I click that, it takes me to the Microsoft site where I could get the details of my Microsoft Entra setup, but I'm not going to log in there for the moment. But basically you need your tenant ID, your client ID, your client secret, and that's about it. All the other defaults that are provided here should work. And that's all it takes for setting up Microsoft Entra. So just filling out a few basic pieces of information. And I guess the interesting thing here is that it also, you can integrate it with roles as well. So if you are using Microsoft Entra and you set up roles in the remote Microsoft Entra configuration, Oqtane can actually synchronize with those roles as well. So you can use basically Microsoft Entra as your RBAC source of truth, so to speak, rather than using the role user assignments that are part of the Oqtane installation. And because Oqtane is multi-tenant, you have the ability to set all of these settings for each site in your installation. So if you are using a different Entra for perhaps, if I go to the other site, if I go to this test site, right, I can set up a different remote identity provider integration for this site than I'm using for the other site. And it keeps them completely separated, treats them as completely separate sites. All right, back to the questions. Okay, I think that was the last question. All right.
Yeah, no, I think that was the last question. The only thing I was seeing is that, yeah, I guess someone clarified in my question is the expansion of the file. Okay, cool, yeah. So I think that's the question, more of a clarification.
I'm not sure I still understand that question of the file system. Michael's question was Entra ID. Okay. So role-based access control. I mean, you can set up role-based access control. Like you can set up roles in your Entra system, and then those roles can be passed through on the token from the IDP, and then the roles can be extracted from the token and mapped into Oqtane. So there is a way to do that. I've done it myself on a few sites, so I know it's 100% possible. Okay.
Cool.
All right. Hopefully that was informative and flowed well. I appreciate the opportunity of sharing, information about Oqtane with your community, and also like demonstrating how easy it is to use Syncfusion Blazor components. Very powerful component suite, and makes it really easy to develop kind of advanced applications.
Yeah, and Shaun, we really appreciate your time, and everyone, thank you very much for joining. I know we are kind of hitting time, so we might have to, if you have any questions, please do keep sending them in. Also, we will make sure to review all of these. And as I mentioned, we do have a blog post that will be going up here in the next few days. So we will be reviewing all of these questions and providing answers, and you can find it there. And that will be included with the recording of this webinar. For anyone who maybe joined a little bit later, just as a reminder, we have been recording this webinar, and I just added a link. This recording will be posted up on the Syncfusion YouTube channel later today. So if you want a refresher, or if you missed the first part, you can go back here in the next couple of hours and you can go check it out, get a nice refresher. But for now, I do just want to thank everyone for joining. And for real, Shaun, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time. And as I can tell, you put in some work on this, so we appreciate your efforts too.
All right. Thank you very much.
Excellent. And everyone, we do have webinars like this every month, mainly multiple times a month. So yeah, keep an eye on all of our socials, and who knows, you might see Shaun join us for a future one. But we hope to see you all soon, and we hope you have a great rest of your day. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.